welcome to the Introduction to Workflow Modeling with Metastorm Provision. I'm Colin Corbin, and I'm going to be leading this session today. This is a description of how to do workflow modeling within the Provision software. So this is part of our series on how to use Provision for business process analysis. Today, really focusing on just the details of a particular model, the workflow model. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Today we're going to go through a little bit of a presentation, a PowerPoint slide deck, and then what we'll do is we'll actually open the tool and we'll work through looking at some workflow models and actually put together a very simple one. So the idea here is to learn the value and usage of workflow models. So the tool gives you the workflow model capability, and part of what we want to convey today is how you use that in business situations. We want to give some indication of how workflows and process models are related. So Metastorm Provision gives you the idea or the concept of a process model, but then it also gives you a workflow, and some folks have difficulty in really sort of figuring out what the difference between those two things are. So we'll cover the differences between workflows and processes and how they relate to one another. We'll talk about the basic components of a workflow model and how to build and interpret workflow models. So today we're not going to really focus on any of the advanced features of workflow, such as process simulation and things of that nature. We're really just going to go through a basic workflow model, which I think is going to apply in probably 90 to 95% of all situations that you're going to get into when dealing with workflow modeling. So with that, what is the value and usage of a workflow model? Well, a workflow model is really something to help you understand how a process works at a detailed level. So it's the individual steps that make up a process. A workflow model, which is a visual depiction of a workflow, helps you understand the relationship among the activities that are performed, the actors who perform them, and the organization in which the process is executed. Of course, it also indicates a lot of other things like cost, timing, and so forth. They help you analyze processes for really just understanding how your processes work, I guess, beyond anything, but also to help you streamline and improve those processes. Helps you understand and improve their capacity, so how much work can actually be executed with a process. And of course, if you're trying to figure out efficiency and how much work effort you can actually achieve with a given process, capacity is an important question. And then scalability, which is your ability to actually increase the amount of effort that goes on within the process. So how do you adjust the process to achieve a greater amount of work being performed? And then finally, workflow models, specifically within Provision, give you a couple of other capabilities. It allows you to define an as-is and a to-be version of a process. So this allows you to do what-if analysis to drive streamlining and process improvement, or to get a better understanding if you change a process, what kind of impacts that's going to have to capacity and scalability. Again, the workflow models themselves give you the capability to do simulation execution. We're not going to get into that today. I think that'll be saved for a different session, but that is a capability that it gives you. So processes and workflows and how they relate. A process diagram in Provision really breaks processes down in a hierarchical standpoint. So to define what a process is a collection of activities which are executed to achieve a business purpose. A workflow is the discrete set of activities or steps within that process. So it shows how they're sequenced out. So if you look at the two diagrams on the page, the one above on the right, with the red squares and the green bubbles, that is a process diagram. It's again a hierarchical view so that you understand how a business domain, which is a collection of processes, breaks down into the individual processes that make up that domain. And finally down into the individual processes or activities which make up those processes. So again, it's a very hierarchical view of a process, whereas a workflow, which is depicted below, shows the individual actors who are responsible for performing activities in the process, and then the individual activities themselves. So the components of a workflow model, I think it's important to understand the different kinds of objects that are available to you when you're making a workflow model. A workflow really tells and depicts who, what, where, when, and how long of a process. And each one of those things has an object related to it that helps you describe it. So actors participate in a process, so these are the resources, whether they're human beings or automated processes, which participate in a workflow. The activities, which are the individual steps in the process and the sequencing. Deliverables, which are artifacts produced or consumed by the process, so this could be an invoice or a receipt or something like that. It could also be a transaction record in a system. It provides the starting, ending, and decision points within the process. So the process has a boundary, a starting point and an ending point, or multiples of each. And finally, decision points within the process that help you branch or aggregate the workflows. Events are also included. An event is something which triggers or is triggered by the process or activities. And then, of course, each workflow and, in fact, each process has a time span and a sequencing of events. Again, the workflow model helps you present each one of these aspects of a process or workflow. So let's go and take a look at some examples here just on a slide so that we can talk about some specific aspects of the workflow model. The workflow, again, has a start and ending point. A start is referred to as a source within Provision, and an ending point is referred to as a sink. And I think these are pretty typical or standard kinds of nomenclature for process activities. The source is, again, the starting boundary. It's depicted here. You can look at it on the screen by this little black ball. And a sink is an ending point, so it's the black ball with a circle around it. A decision point is where an activity branches, or where a workflow branches. And in a decision point, it's an either-or path through the workflow. A junction, on the other hand, is where a process converges or diverges. And the distinction here is that whether you're converging or diverging, both paths are followed. It's not an either-or like a decision point. And again, the junction is depicted by this little bar here. So actors are organizations, roles, people, or automated processes which participate in a workflow. And they're depicted here as an individual swim lane. And the idea here is that where a decision or an activity or a starting point, basically any object on the model, occurs within a swim lane, that indicates the actor which is responsible for executing that activity. Now there are ways that you can have multiple actors collaborate to perform an activity, because it's not always that that an activity is done by only one person or one actor, but that's an advanced topic that we'll get to later. For the most part, what we're talking about is an activity being assigned to a particular individual or a particular role. Deliverables are logical or physical items created or consumed by a process or activity. Here you can see the deliverable line. So in this case, the decision point is creating a deliverable and sending it to this activity here, and it's listed here as an order. Now it can be, again, something physical like an invoice, or it could be a transaction record or something of that nature. An event is an action which triggers an activity within a process. So for instance, it could be a temporal occurrence, a certain amount of time has passed, or it could be a threshold level that's reached. An activity, again, it's a discrete step in a sequence of events, and it can be performed by one or more actors. For the most part, though, what we're talking about is performance by a single actor. And the square here is really showing you some of the different attributes of an activity, and actually we're going to get into each one of these in detail, because when it comes to a workflow model, the activity is actually the most complex, I think, object that you can include within the workflow model. So activities have properties. They have a